Europa's pale surface stretched out before Marco Frost like an endless desert of ice. 6 months into his 18-month assignment at Outpost Callisto, the monotony had begun to wear on him. Every day, the same routine. Suit up, venture out, collect samples, return, analyze, sleep. Repeat. But today was different. The ground-penetrating radar had detected an anomaly 3 kilometers from base, a perfectly symmetrical structure buried 20 meters beneath the ice. Command had approved a preliminary investigation, with Marco leading the expedition. Approaching target zone, Marco reported through his helmet comm beacon activated. Beginning descent. He carefully lowered himself into the shaft that the thermal drills had carved over the past 72 hours. The ice walls gleamed around him, refracting his headlamp in prismatic patterns as he descended deeper into Europa's crust. Vitals stable, oxygen at 97%, came Dr. Isabel Vaughn's voice through his earpiece. You're approaching the anomaly. Proceed with caution, Lieutenant Frost. Copy that, Marco replied, his breath creating small puffs of condensation inside his helmet. His heart pounded with anticipation. After months of nothing but ice cores and water samples, the possibility of discovering something extraordinary made his pulse quicken. At the bottom of the shaft, his boots touched down on something that wasn't ice. The material had an almost metallic quality, yet it felt warm beneath his feet despite the sub-zero temperatures. I'm at the structure, he reported, sweeping his light across the surface. It's not what we expected. This isn't a natural formation. The material appears synthetic. As his beam moved across the structure, it revealed intricate patterns etched into the surface, symbols unlike any human language. Marco traced them with his gloved fingers, feeling the indentations beneath the thick material of his suit. I'm detecting a hollow space inside, he said, consulting his scanner. There's a seam here, possibly an entrance. Marco, wait for the secondary team. Commander Hayes ordered through the comm, do not attempt to breach the structure. But something pulled at Marco, an inexplicable need to know what lay within. His fingers found a circular depression in the material. When he pressed his palm against it, the surface beneath his hand began to glow with a soft, blue-green light. Something's happening, he whispered, mesmerized as the light spread outward from his hand, illuminating the symbols in sequence. The surface before him parted silently, revealing a chamber bathed in the same ethereal glow. Marco, report. What's happening? Hayes demanded. Marco stepped inside, ignoring the protests erupting in his earpiece. The chamber was small but perfectly preserved, its walls covered in the same strange symbols. At its center stood a crystalline pod, frosted over but transparent enough to reveal a humanoid figure within. There's someone in here, he breathed, approaching the pod. A person. No, not human. Similar, but different. As he drew closer, he could make out more details. The figure appeared female, with delicate features and skin that shimmered with a subtle iridescence. Her hair, pale as starlight, floated around her face as if suspended in liquid, though the pod contained no visible fluid. I think she's in some kind of suspended animation, Marco reported, his scientific mind cataloging details even as wonder overwhelmed him. The technology is unlike anything I've seen. The pod's surface was covered in similar symbols to those outside, and at its base, another circular depression waited. Marco hesitated, knowing he should wait, knowing protocol demanded caution. But something in her face, peaceful yet somehow lonely, called to him across the gulf of species and time. Marco, do not engage with the technology, Hayes barked. That's an order. His hand moved as if of its own accord, pressing against the depression. The crystal pod hummed to life, the frost dissipating as warmth emanated from beneath his palm. The woman's eyes snapped open, revealing irises of vivid violet that seemed to capture the light around them. Her gaze locked with his through his visor, and in that moment, something passed between them, recognition, impossible though it seemed. Her lips parted, and though no sound carried through the vacuum-sealed pod, Marco somehow heard her voice in his mind, soft as a whisper, yet clear as a bell. At last, she seemed to say, "You've come for me." As alarms blared in his suit, warning of unauthorized interaction with extraterrestrial technology, Marco knew his life would never be the same again. "You've broken every protocol in the book, Lieutenant." Commander Hayes paced the length of the quarantine lab, his face flushed with anger. Through the observation window, a team of scientists hovered around the crystalline pod that now occupied the center of the sterile chamber. Marco stood at attention, but his eyes kept drifting to the alien woman inside. With respect, sir, she was alive. I couldn't leave her frozen down there. That wasn't your call to make. Hayes rubbed his temples. The entirety of human first contact protocol, ignored because you had a gut feeling. Inside the chamber, Dr. Emilia Torres carefully monitored the pod's systems as they completed the revival cycle Marco had inadvertently initiated. The pod's crystal surface had become increasingly transparent, revealing more of the woman within, her iridescent skin now pulsing with a subtle luminescence that ebbed and flowed like tides. Her vital signs are unlike anything I've seen, Torres reported through the comm, but they're strengthening. Whatever stasis technology this is, it's incredibly sophisticated. Marco felt a strange flutter in his chest each time the alien woman's life signs peaked on the monitors. Something about her called to him on a level he couldn't explain, a connection that had formed the moment their eyes met. Sir, he said, turning to Hayes, I believe she tried to communicate with me telepathically. If that's the case, we have even more reason to be cautious, Hayes interrupted. We don't know her capabilities or intentions. The pod suddenly emitted a soft chime, and the crystal segments began to separate like the petals of a flower opening to the sun. The scientists stepped back, instruments raised defensively. The alien woman sat up slowly, her movements fluid and graceful despite her millennium of slumber. Her hair, now free from the stasis field, cascaded down her shoulders in waves that shimmered between silver and pale blue. She blinked, adjusting to the light, then turned her head deliberately toward the observation window toward Marco. Those violet eyes found his, and again he felt her presence in his mind, gentle but unmistakable. Bondmate, came the thought, carrying with it impressions of warmth, relief, and something deeper, an ancient longing finally fulfilled. She's looking right at you, Lieutenant, Torres observed. And her neural patterns just spiked. Marco stepped closer to the glass. Can you hear me? He asked aloud. The alien woman tilted her head, then gracefully rose from the pod. She stood nearly as tall as Marco, her body lithe and strong despite her delicate appearance. The simple garment she wore, something like a bodysuit made of material that shifted colors with her movements, accentuated her otherworldly beauty. She approached the glass, placed one six-fingered hand against it, and waited, expectation clear in her gaze. Almost involuntarily, Marco raised his hand to match hers on the opposite side of the glass. The moment he did, a flood of images cascaded through his mind, a distant world with twin moons, towering crystal spires, and beings like her preparing a young woman, herself, for a journey. Vespera, the impression came. I am Vespera. Vespera, Marco whispered aloud. Her name is Vespera. Hayes stared at him. How could you possibly know that? She told me. Marco replied simply, unable to look away from her. She's been waiting for someone. For me, she thinks. Torres approached the communication panel. Vespera, can you understand our language? The alien woman, Vespera, didn't respond to Torres. Her focus remained entirely on Marco, her hand still pressed against the glass, separating them. 1,000 cycles I have slept, her thoughts conveyed to him, tinged with confusion and hope. Sent to unite our worlds through sacred bond. You are not as I expected, yet the call is strong between us. She says she's been in stasis for 1,000 cycles, Marco translated, feeling the truth of her words resonate within him. She was sent as some kind of diplomatic envoy. A bride. His eyebrows shot up. A bride? For whom? I think. For whoever found her, Marco replied, feeling warmth rise to his cheeks. This is absurd, Hayes declared. We need to isolate her until we understand exactly what we're dealing with. Lieutenant, you're relieved from this operation effective immediately. But as security personnel entered the quarantine chamber to escort Vespera to a containment cell, her expression shifted from serene to alarmed. The lights throughout the lab flickered, and equipment began to malfunction. Do not separate us, her voice pleaded in Marco's mind. The bond has begun. It would harm us both. Without thinking, Marco pressed the quarantine override and burst into the chamber. Wait, he called to the security team. You're frightening her. As he approached, Vespera's distress visibly subsided. She reached for him, her fingers trembling slightly. When their hands finally touched, skin to skin, A current like static electricity passed between them, and Marco gasped at the intensity of the connection that formed, a bridge between two vastly different beings who had somehow found each other across the stars. "So your people sent you as a bride?" Marco asked, sitting across from Vespera in his quarters. 3 days had passed since her awakening, and Commander Hayes had reluctantly agreed to release her into Marco's custody after she'd refused to communicate with anyone else. Vespera nodded, her movements always carrying that fluid grace that made even the simplest gestures seem like part of a dance. She had begun to learn English with remarkable speed, though she still relied on their telepathic connection for complex concepts. "My people, the Astrani, believe in cosmic resonance," she explained, her voice melodic with an accent that made ordinary words sound like poetry. "When worlds are destined to meet, they send forth ambassadors, those with the gift to form deep bonds." She touched the iridescent marking at her temple, a swirling pattern that sometimes glowed when their minds connected. "I was chosen for my strong empathic abilities, sent to sleep until my destined bondmate discovered me." Marco ran a hand through his dark hair, still struggling to process everything. "But your people couldn't have known humans would evolve, or that we'd reach Europa." A mysterious smile curved her lips. "The universe unfolds as it must. You were drawn to me across time and space, just as I was sent to find you." Their quarters were small, a standard researcher's cabin not meant for two, but Marco had given Vespera the bed while he took the floor. Not that he'd slept much. His mind was too full of the images she had shared with him of her world, Astrania, a planet orbiting a binary star system, where crystal cities rose like giants from violet seas. And its people communed with each other through thought and touch. "What happens now?" he asked, watching as she examined a small plant he kept on his desk, one of the few touches of Earth in this sterile outpost. "Your mission was to form an alliance through marriage. But your civilization may not even exist anymore." Sadness flickered across her features. "This is possible. 1,000 years is long even by Astrani standards. But the bond between us remains." She looked up at him, her violet eyes reflecting the dim cabin lights. "Do you not feel it, Marco?" He did. Every time their skin touched, every time their minds brushed against each other, he felt something bloom inside him, a connection unlike anything he'd experienced with another person. It terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. "Earth isn't ready for contact with an advanced civilization," he said instead of answering directly. "That's why Hayes wants to keep your existence classified." "Your commander fears what he does not understand," Vespera observed, rising from her seat to move closer to him. "But you do not fear me." "No," Marco admitted, his heart racing as she approached. "I don't." Over the past days, he had shown her Earth's culture through the station's database, music, art, literature, history. In turn, she had shared memories of her world through their mental connection, experiences so vivid he felt as though he'd walked the crystal spires of her home himself. Now she stood before him, close enough that he could see the subtle patterns shifting beneath her skin, bioluminescent markers that responded to her emotions. "Among my people," she said softly, "the bond grows through shared knowledge, through understanding." She held out her hand, palm up. "I would know you more deeply, Marco Frost." Marco hesitated only briefly before placing his hand in hers. The connection opened between them immediately, a flood of memories and sensations. He felt her curiosity about him, her growing affection, her fear of being alone in this strange new time. And she felt everything in return, his wonder at discovering her, his conflict between duty and desire, the growing attraction he could no longer deny. "Vespera," he whispered, her name both a question and an answer. She stepped closer still, her free hand rising to trace the contours of his face. "Your kind expresses connection differently than mine," she observed, her fingers trailing along his jaw. "Through physical touch that is separate from mental joining." "Yes," Marco managed, his voice husky. "Show me," she invited. He closed the distance between them, his lips meeting hers tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as she responded to his kiss. The mental connection between them amplified every sensation, a feedback loop of pleasure and discovery that made the room seem to spin around them. Her skin warmed beneath his touch, the bioluminescent patterns flaring with intensity as his hands traced the curve of her waist, the elegant line of her spine. Their minds intertwined as intimately as their bodies, sharing not just sensation but emotion, wonder, desire, and something dangerously close to love. Later, as they lay entwined in the narrow bed, Vespera's head resting on his chest, Marco knew he had crossed a line from which there was no return. The bond between them had deepened into something profound and irreversible. "What happens when they discover you're harboring an alien in your quarters, Lieutenant?" came Commander Hayes' cold voice from the doorway. Marco jerked upright to see Hayes standing there, security officers flanking him, his expression a mixture of disgust and disappointment. "Sir, I can explain," Marco began, but Hayes cut him off. "Save it for your court-martial, Frost. Security, escort our guest to containment. The lieutenant and I need to have a serious discussion about the future of his career." As the guards approached, Vespera's eyes widened in alarm, the patterns beneath her skin pulsing rapidly. "Do not let them separate us," her voice echoed in his mind. "The bond, once formed, cannot be broken without harm." Marco stood protectively in front of her, knowing that whatever happened next would change everything, not just for him and Vespera, but potentially for two entire species. "Do you understand the severity of your actions, Lieutenant?" Commander Hayes leaned across the interrogation table, his face tight with restrained anger. "Unauthorized contact with an extraterrestrial life form. Failure to follow quarantine protocols. Withholding critical information." Marco sat rigidly in his chair, still in the standard-issue gray t-shirt and sweatpants he'd been wearing when security had dragged him from his quarters. 6 hours had passed since they'd separated him from Vespera, and every minute felt like physical pain, a hollow ache where their connection had been. "Where is she?" he asked, ignoring the commander's question. Hayes' jaw clenched. "She's being kept comfortable while we determine how to proceed. Dr. Torres is conducting non-invasive examinations to ensure she poses no biological threat." "She's not a threat," Marco insisted, leaning forward. "Sir, what we've discovered is the opportunity of a lifetime, peaceful first contact with an advanced civilization. A civilization that apparently sends out, what? Marriage diplomats." Hayes shook his head. "And you've already compromised any scientific objectivity by forming an inappropriate relationship with the subject." "Her name is Vespera," Marco said quietly. "And what's between us isn't inappropriate. Her people forge alliances through pair bonds. It's their equivalent of a diplomatic treaty." Hayes regarded him skeptically. "You actually believe you were destined to find her? That this isn't some form of alien manipulation?" The question struck a nerve. In his more rational moments, Marco had wondered the same thing. Could the connection he felt be artificial, some evolutionary adaptation the Astrani had developed to ensure the success of their missions? But then he remembered the depth of what they'd shared, not just physical intimacy but a true melding of minds. The sincerity of her emotions, the vulnerability of her spirit. That couldn't be faked. "I believe she's exactly what she claims to be," Marco said firmly. "And I believe separating us is causing her harm." As if summoned by his words, the station's alarms began to wail. The lights flickered, then dimmed to emergency power. "Commander Hayes to medical, report." Hayes barked into his comm. Dr. Torres' voice came through, strained and urgent. "Sir, our guest is experiencing some kind of seizure. Her biology is reacting violently, emitting energy pulses that are interfering with our systems." Marco was on his feet immediately. "It's the bond. I told you we can't be separated." Hayes hesitated, clearly weighing his options as the station around them groaned under some unseen stress. Finally, he nodded curtly. "Take us to medical," he ordered the guard. When they arrived, they found the medical bay in chaos. Equipment sparked and malfunctioned around Vespera, who lay rigidly on an examination table, her skin pulsing with intense light. The patterns beneath her skin had become angular and sharp, so different from their usual flowing grace. "Her neural patterns are off the charts," Torres reported, frantically trying to stabilize her equipment. "Whatever's happening is affecting our power system station-wide." Marco pushed past the guards and rushed to Vespera's side. "I'm here," he said, taking her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, her body relaxed, and the lights in the station stabilized. The connection between them snapped back into place with almost painful clarity. "Marco," her voice echoed in his mind, weak but relieved. "The separation, it harms the bond." "I know," he whispered aloud. "I'm sorry. I won't let them separate us again." Hayes approached cautiously, observing the immediate change in both Vespera and the station's systems. "What just happened, Lieutenant?" "The bond between Astrani pairs is more than emotional. It's physiological," Marco explained, Not taking his eyes off Vespera as color returned to her iridescent skin. Breaking it causes a stress reaction that manifests physically. Torres stepped forward, scanner in hand. He's right, Commander. Her vital signs are stabilizing now that he's in contact with her. It's remarkable. Hayes frowned thoughtfully. Even if what you're saying is true, it doesn't change the fact that her presence here violates every protocol we have. Earth Central will want her contained, studied. I won't let that happen, Marco said quietly but firmly. You may not have a choice, Lieutenant. Your career is already over. The only question now is whether you face a dishonorable discharge or prison time. A tremor suddenly shook the station, violent enough to send equipment crashing to the floor. This was different from Vespera's influence. This was Europa itself. Commander, a voice came urgently through the comm. Seismic event detected. Multiple fractures forming in the ice shelf beneath the station. Structural integrity at 60% and falling. Hayes sprang into action. Initiate emergency protocols. Prepare for possible evacuation. More tremors followed, each stronger than the last. Warning lights flashed as hairline cracks appeared in the medical bay's ceiling. The station's foundation is compromised, Torres reported, examining a structural schematic. If those cracks reach the primary support pillars, the whole station could sink into the subsurface ocean, Hayes finished grimly. Vespera sat up suddenly, her eyes wide. I can help. Her English was clear now, without Marco having to translate her thoughts. My people built structures beneath ice oceans. I know how to stabilize the fractures. Hayes looked skeptical, but as another, stronger tremor shook the station, he had few options. What do you need? Access to your maintenance systems, she replied, sliding gracefully off the examination table. And Marco. 20 minutes later, they stood in the Environmental Control Center as Vespera manipulated the station's subsurface drones with astonishing skill. Through their mental connection, Marco could feel her analyzing the fracture patterns, applying knowledge from her world to save theirs. There, she said finally, stepping back from the control panel. The thermal arrays have sealed the primary fractures. Your station will hold. The confirmation came moments later from the engineering team. The seismic activity was subsiding, and structural integrity was returning to acceptable levels. Hayes stared at Vespera with newfound respect. You saved the station. You saved all our lives. She inclined her head in acknowledgement. Your world and mine have much to offer each other. This was always the purpose of my journey. Later, as they returned to Marco's quarters, now under guard, but at least together, Vespera placed her hand against his chest, feeling his heartbeat. Your commander still fears what will happen when your Earth Central learns of me, she observed. Marco covered her hand with his own. Yes, and he's right to worry. Some would see you as a threat, others as a resource to be exploited. Few would understand what you truly represent. And what is that, Marco Frost? She asked, her violet eyes searching his. He smiled softly, bringing her hand to his lips. A future I never imagined. A connection I never thought possible. He paused, weighing his next words carefully. Vespera, if your civilization still exists, would you take me there? The patterns beneath her skin shimmered with joy at his question. You would leave your world behind? This outpost was supposed to be humanity's first step to the stars, he said. Maybe I was always meant to take the next step. She leaned her forehead against his, joining their minds so he could feel the depth of her emotion. Whatever awaits us, her thoughts whispered, we face it together. The observation deck offered the most spectacular view of Europa's ice plains, Jupiter's massive form looming on the horizon like a watchful deity. Marco stood there, his reflection ghostly in the reinforced glass, as he contemplated the decision that would change his life forever. 2 weeks had passed since Vespera had saved the station. In that time, her status had shifted from prisoner to honored guest. Her knowledge of subglacial engineering had proven invaluable in reinforcing the outpost's structural integrity. Yet despite this newfound respect, Hayes had made it clear that Earth Central's response would likely be far less accommodating once they learned of her existence. The transport arrives in 3 days, came Vespera's voice from behind him. Your commander says we must decide before then. Marco turned to find her standing in the doorway, her luminescent skin casting soft patterns of light across the darkened room. She wore a modified station uniform now, but still moved with that otherworldly grace that never failed to captivate him. Hayes is giving us a choice, he said, extending his hand to her. She crossed the room to take it, their connection flowing open between them immediately. When the transport arrives, We can either submit to Earth Central's authority, or we take the beacon ship and attempt to find my homeworld, she finished, referring to the small vessel they had discovered alongside her stasis pod, a craft designed for interstellar travel, powered by technology humanity had barely begun to theorize about. Marco nodded, drawing her closer. Hayes is willing to report that both you and the ship were destroyed in the seismic event. It would give us a head start before anyone comes looking. The gravity of what they were considering hung between them. For Vespera, it meant the possibility of returning home, though to a civilization that might have changed beyond recognition in the millennium of her absence. For Marco, it meant leaving behind everything he had ever known, his career, his planet, his species. You would truly come with me, she asked, her mental touch conveying both hope and concern. Your world is here. He smiled softly, brushing a strand of her starlight hair from her face. My world is wherever you are now. The bond between us has made that clear. They had spent every moment together since being reunited, their connection deepening with each passing day. Through their mental link, they had shared memories, knowledge, dreams, weaving together a shared understanding that transcended their different origins. And in the privacy of his quarters, they had discovered all the ways their bodies could commune when their minds were already joined, finding exquisite pleasure in the harmony of their differences. What of your fear? She asked gently. I feel it still, beneath your certainty. Marco sighed, appreciating the impossibility of hiding any emotion from her. Of course I'm afraid. We don't know if your world still exists, or if they would welcome a human. We don't even know if the ship will work after all this time. Yet still you would go. Yes, he said simply. Because staying means watching you become a specimen, a diplomatic incident, a resource to be exploited. And because. He hesitated, then pushed through his reservation. Because I love you, Vespera. In a way I never thought possible. The patterns beneath her skin flared brilliantly at his words, her joy radiating through their connection like sunlight. Among her people, such feelings were shared directly mind to mind, rarely vocalized, but she understood the significance of his human declaration. Then we go together, she said, her voice resonating with certainty. Tomorrow we begin preparation of the beacon ship. The next day passed in a flurry of activity. Under the guise of studying the alien vessel, they secretly prepared it for launch, loading supplies, programming the navigation system with Vespera's knowledge of the stars. Hayes provided them with additional resources, his initial hostility having transformed into a grudging respect for their courage. On their final night on Europa, as they lay together in Marco's quarters for the last time, Vespera propped herself up on one elbow to gaze down at him, her violet eyes luminous in the dim light. Among my people, she said softly, when two souls choose to journey together, they perform the ritual of eternal binding. Her fingers traced patterns on his chest, leaving trails of light that slowly faded. It is more than what you call marriage. It is the complete harmonization of two beings. Marco captured her hand, bringing it to his lips. Show me. She smiled, then pressed her palm to the center of his chest. He felt a warmth spread outward from her touch, a pleasant tingling that seemed to reach into the core of his being. Close your eyes, she whispered. As he did, their mental connection expanded beyond anything they had previously shared. He felt himself falling into her, not just her thoughts and memories, but the very essence of who she was. And she was falling into him, their consciousness intertwining like stars merging their light. With this joining, I give you all that I am. Her voice echoed within their shared mind space. Through distance and time, through joy and sorrow, our spirits remain as one. Instinctively, he responded in kind, offering himself completely to her. Something shifted between them, a permanent bridge where before there had been only a tenuous connection. When he opened his eyes, he found that the bioluminescent patterns on her skin had changed, forming a new configuration that somehow matched the rhythm of his heartbeat. We are bound now, she said, wonder in her voice. Even across the stars, we would find each other again. At dawn, they made their way to the hangar where the beacon ship waited. Hayes met them there, along with Dr. Torres and a few other crew members who had come to respect Vespera during her time at the station. The transport from Earth will arrive in 18 hours, Hayes informed them. Once you launch, we'll report that the alien vessel self-destructed during examination, taking Lieutenant Frost with it. He extended his hand to Marco. For what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. Marco shook his commander's hand for the last time. Thank you, sir. For everything. The goodbye was brief. There was too much risk and lingering. Within minutes, they were sealed inside the beacon ship, its crystalline control panels coming to life under Vespera's touch. The ship recognizes me, she explained as symbols flashed across the transparent surfaces. It's accepting the coordinates for Astronia. Through the viewport, they watched as the hangar doors slid open, revealing Europa's stark landscape and the infinite blackness of space beyond. Are you ready? Vespera asked, reaching for his hand. Marco entwined his fingers with hers, marveling at how natural it felt now. This connection between two beings from different worlds. Ready. The beacon ship rose silently, its ancient engines humming with power that defied human understanding. As they cleared the outpost, Jupiter loomed before them, massive and majestic, the last glimpse of the solar system Marco had called home. But as Vespera activated the interstellar drive and the stars began to blur around them, he felt no regret, only anticipation for the journey ahead. I don't know what we'll find, he said, watching as the familiar constellations gave way to unknown stars. Whether your home still exists, or what they'll make of us if it does. Vespera smiled, the patterns on her skin pulsing in harmony with his heartbeat, visible proof of their bond. Whatever awaits us, she replied, echoing the promise they had made to each other, we face it together. As the beacon ship accelerated beyond the limits of human technology, carrying them toward an uncertain future among the stars, Marco knew with absolute certainty that he had made the right choice. In finding Vespera, he had discovered not just love, but his true purpose, to be the bridge between their worlds, the pioneer of a new understanding between species. And as they left the solar system behind, embarking on a journey no human had ever taken, he felt not fear but wonder, the same wonder he had experienced when he first looked into her violet eyes beneath Europa's ice. Whatever the universe held for them, their story was just beginning.